Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to come back to another episode of Let's Talk Climate Change Conversations, this time with Professor Mahesh Rangarajan. It's been a pleasure to have Mahesh here. We've been trying to do this for a long time, and Mahesh is someone that I've known well and admired his work for now close to 30 years, I guess, since we first met.
My privilege. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, from 94 onwards, I guess, when I first met you, Mahesh. But most of you in the audience will know of him, but I'll do a very quick introduction. He is one of India's foremost and best-known environmental historians who teaches both history and environmental studies at Ashoka University in Delhi. Mahesh has a PhD from Oxford University and has taught at universities of Cornell, Jadavpur, National Center Biological Sciences, Ashoka University, of course, Kriya University, and a number of other places. His Fencing the Forest 1996 book is still an environmental history classic in India. And of course, he's gone on to write and edit a number of other very influential volumes on the idea of environmental history. He also does work on electoral analysis, which is an interesting combination of two different areas of work. But today we're going to talk to Mahesh about his long trajectory of working on the environment since indeed he was in high school or even middle school. And talk about the influences, as we always do, early childhood influences, the kinds of work you do, Mahesh, the idea of the importance of interdisciplinarity and indeed of the environmental social sciences and environmental humanities in work on the environment and climate change in India. So we'll begin now, and there's so much that we need to dig into here. But I'll start as we often start, with early childhood experiences. We've been getting a number of guests into this program, and one of the things they often say is that early childhood knowledge of the environment, typically in rural village areas surrounded by nature, has shaped their interest in the environment. For instance, we had Professor Madhavan Rajivan Nair, who was the former Secretary Ministry of Earth Sciences and one of India's best-known climatologists. And he grew up in a small rural village in Kerala near the Western Ghats areas. And that was his experience of the monsoon, because, of course, the monsoon strikes in those places very dramatically. You grew up in Delhi, and you have this deep interest of the environment. So this is really unusual for us. How did that interest come about?
Actually, I lived 4 years with my grandparents in Vellore. And one of the commonalities of Delhi and Vellore is they're incredibly hot, dry places. They are known for very cruel summers. So I was lucky to live in a house with a very large garden, tall trees. I managed once, while trying to catch a frog at the age of 3.5, 4, to almost sink in the pond. And only the postman who was coming from the gate, he saw me shouting or screaming and he pulled me out. I don't know how apocryphal a story is and whether it's exaggerated, but I don't think most 3-4-year-olds try to pick up a frog. And
you have no memory of this?
For some reason, I believe I did.
You have no memory of this?
No, obviously not. And I do remember, however, going regularly to the circus when we saw what we were told was the Royal Bengal tiger and African lion. And every morning I would pay a pilgrimage to the circus to see them in what I now realize are extremely small cages. The excitement of Delhi at age of 4 was remarkable. One of the first visits to the zoo, the car we were in next to us, a jeep drove up. And at the back of the jeep, there was someone I later got to know, he was my guru in early days, was Kailash Sankhala, then the director of Delhi Zoo. This was, I think, in 1969. And next to him, believe it or not, was a full-grown tiger named Jim, named, of course, after Jim.
In the open jeep?
Yes. And Jim had grown up in his house. So he'd taken Jim out for a jeep ride or whatever you call it. And I decided I would stay on in Delhi because I saw my first white tiger. I didn't know there was such a thing as a white tiger. And it was magical living in central Delhi because in those days there was very little car traffic. So around 4:30 in the morning, one woke up to a lion, male lion, roaring. And male lion has a very particular call, which I worked on as a historian later, and its historical significance. Something like whoomph, 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 and then it goes off. And that's a very bad imitation. So I think there was a fascination with animals, and then that went on to other things.
So it's interesting. I will later, but why do you think you then, I'm skipping things. Why do you think you didn't want to become a wildlife biologist then?
See, biology in the days I went to school was an extremely boring subject. You did lots of drawings and it was nice. I didn't do too badly in it in class 10. But by then I was clear I would do the the social sciences, history. I was very fascinated by all the swirl of changes. And I think the place we went bird watching, Delhi Ridge, there was a lot of activity happening there in terms of cutting large parts of it down. And in 78, 79, 80, I was involved with a group of students who acted very hard with, mobilized with the middle class residents. What my distinguished colleague has called bourgeois environmentalism. It was bourgeois, but I think bourgeois environmentalism shouldn't only be seen in negative light. Protecting the ridge was a very important cause for all of us, and we emphasized not only the bird life or the plant life, but the fact that it's a large urban forest and its possible education value, which is still not. So I saw all of that played some role in my wanting to study, the processes, because one of the things we found in that 2-3 year period even, we were running pillar to post. Remember, we were students, mostly in high school and college.
Which school was this?
I was in St. Columbus. There were people in other schools. People are very kind to us. I have no idea why Chief Metropolitan Councillor, Chief Town Planner, MCD, they all met us. We managed eventually to meet even Prime Minister. They were incredibly encouraging. I must say, none of them, they first tried to elicit that we were doing this on our own, that no adult was instigating us. And once they were convinced of the seriousness, they treated us literally like adults, because they realized we knew the exact places we were talking about. I think this was very important. We had gone walking in those areas. We had studied them. There were no GIS maps in those days.
So Mahesh, just to step back, this is a history that is really important, and I don't think anywhere, I haven't at least seen it told anywhere. When was this? When did you start bird watching in the Delhi Ridge, and why?
76. There was a group led by Pradeep Sankla, who was the son of Kailash Sankla, who happened to be our neighbor, the same director. And we used to go on Sundays. We were very primitive bird watchers. I don't think we would qualify as birders today. But we found there was a lot of lopping and felling. And this then became a larger effort. Number of others got drawn in. They were nature clubs. Finally, the Gordian knot was cut by Mrs. Gandhi in 1980. This is there in Jairam Ramesh's book.
So you managed to get an appointment to meet her?
Yes.
How was that appointment?
Those days, there was what is called a darbar. You get in. My father was a senior journalist. He just got us through the gate. There was no major security. There was a large group of us. We gave a memorandum, and frankly, we didn't expect very much to happen. I now know, because I have studied this period as a scholar, I have written a paper on her, that Mrs. Indira Gandhi in the 1950s had been president of Delhi Birdwatcher Society. And this was a society founded by the Quaker Horace Alexander. She had an interest in birds and nature going back to the 30s. So she was not a newcomer to this. We also know from Ashok Parthasarthi's book that as Prime Minister, she had opposed the army setting up a number of listening posts on the ridge because she felt it will ruin its skyline. So we didn't know, how would we, in 1980.
So she was already interested in the ridge and knew the ridge well.
She had a sense of the issues. She could listen with her left ear, if you like. And she then referred it to the Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Jagmohan. Now, he's very controversial for slum demolitions in emergency and later, but he had a very deep sense of gardens and nature and the aesthetic, having been in the CPWD. He then called a series of meetings. I was not often present. I think I was preparing for my board exam by then. See, time goes on. And these meetings, all the heads of horticulture department, MCD, NDMC, all the people we were running pillar to post were there on a Sunday. And he probably must have advised her, and they issued a notification April 1980 declaring the ridge a protected forest. Now, just note, this happens in 80. 93, the NGO forum goes to the court because there's more felling on the ridge. Right now, this is 2025. The forest department is carrying out final notification of ridge as a reserved forest.
So it takes that long arc.
Understandably, there are villages now which are in the ridge. Some of them will, of course, tell you they've been there a long time. It's a more complicated issue than we thought. But I do want to say that 7,777 hectares was demarcated as a green area. In 93, amicus curiae Lavraj Kumar, the first Indian Rhodes Scholar, was appointed, former Secretary Government of India. He took a pen and drew a line around this ridge, and that area is under the Ridge Management Board.
So it's very difficult to do a counterfactual in history. But do you think if the group had not gone and made this petition and talked about it, and if you were not children, which obviously meant that people took you very much more seriously. I mean, as you see now with the climate change campaigns by young people across the world. Do you think if you hadn't done that the ridge would be protected today?
I will not attempt a counterfactual. One of the things to learn as a student of history is you don't attempt it. Because one of the differences in social and natural sciences is here you can't run the experiment.
Right.
If you change one variable, it changes everything.
But what is your sense of the importance of it?
Suppose Mrs. Gandhi was not Prime Minister. Would we have got it? Would another Prime Minister have had this interest? And there I will argue that the particular set of influences that were there on her and the particular moment she became Prime Minister engendered a climate where government was especially open to certain kinds of environmental concerns in a certain way. Protecting the forest was very important to them. Let's say grassland wasn't, just for argument's sake. And forests in Delhi become particularly important because it's got that particular arid, semi-arid climate. This importance has not been accorded, as Professor Narayani Gupta, the prime historian of Delhi, has pointed out, to the very large unbuilt area of the Yamuna. Right now, there is a big debate. And there's a very interesting paper by Ravi Agarwal in a book I've co-edited, where he talks about the history of the ridge movement and the conflicts over the ridge. And one of the points he makes in passing, and this has been covered by others, with the Yamuna, it's more difficult. Now, one answer is the Yamuna, 22 kilometers, is through Delhi. If you just look at the area of the Yamuna floodplain, it's very large. I think the building interests here are of a different order. It's also different times from early 80s. Government's ability to regulate, paradoxically, was more in 80s than today. That had negatives, maybe, that economists will give you also. But one of the positives could be that it could move in very fast and regulation could happen. It might have been that the regulation was uneven. Some sections of population suffered more, lost more, certainly.
But did any of you go bird watching then along the Yamuna, or was it the ridge that was a favorite?
No, we did. But I don't think Yamuna faced this kind of threat that it faces today. This type of building threat.
So the threat is really now?
It's a different kind of issue today.
So if you move from the ridge to Silent Valley, because I believe the same group of all of you had a petition against the Silent Valley?
Little bit earlier, these were all amorphous groups. The petition on Silent Valley was in 78.
So can you tell us the full history of that?
No, that had a very simple history. There was an article by Ram Whitaker in the WWF Quarterly. Having read that and running to M.K. Prasad, he came and gave a talk which was organized by a group of us. We then wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister Morarji Desai. We never got an acknowledgement except by telegram.
How many of you and how old were you? What age was you?
14, around the same age, 13. And basically a bunch of school, I think I regret to say school boys, but mine was a boys' school. And we signed a letter. I wrote an article also in the newspaper. And Silent Valley didn't get stopped because of our letter. Kerala Sahitya Parishad mounted a huge campaign. But again, I think Mrs. Gandhi was crucial because she came back to power in January 80. This is a remarkable project because both the major political fronts in Kerala had been for the project. They saw it as vital for development of North Kerala. She appointed a Swaminathan committee, and your supervisor, Professor Gadgil, has told the story of the committee and how it came up with the alternative expansion of the Idukki project. And Silent Valley eventually got declared as a national park in 1985 by Rajiv Gandhi. So these are protracted, complex issues. And I think, again, having studied this issue later, or at least Mrs. Gandhi later, she had to take care to balance the legitimate development interests of the people of North Kerala, backward, underdeveloped region, with the environmental values of Silent Valley. It both had to be balanced. And I think that striving for a balance was something India was learning in the 70s and 80s. And I think as a student of history, I'm very conscious of that fact that balance is much tougher for a developing country, which has been making the transition from an agrarian to a post-agrarian society.
So let me ask you something more personal then. When you went for these bird watching trips or you went to the zoo, you saw the white tiger, what did it make you feel that made you stay with the environment as a topic of study? Because clearly there's something back to these childhood experiences. There's a certain personal commitment or personal feeling for these.
No, I think there is a very important intermediate step, which is that there were two people very influential for me. One was Sundarlalji, whom we met at one of the critical moments during that ridge protest. He came at a big meeting and hugged all of us and said that it's very good you're doing this, but why don't you come to the villages of Uttarakhand and see what the women there are doing? So we then went in summer of 80, about 20 of us. And over the next 2 years, more people went. And he broke us into groups of 4, 5. We went into various parts of Garhwal and we spent time. We stayed in houses of people who couldn't even feed us in one house. So we broke up, one person going to different person's house. Sometimes we slept in the same room as the animals because that was the only room which was warm enough. And we went to places where community action had protected the forest. We saw the relationship, for instance, between anti-liquor and the protection of the forest because it is a women's issue. Also the relationship of their livelihood with the oak trees as opposed to the pine monocultures which Forest Department was promoting. And I think this led to debate, a lot of debate among all of us, that this is a larger issue than the forest of Delhi and bird watching and whatever. And little later, during my college years, by then I'd taken the humanities, decided to study history. Another fortuitous event happened. Our nature club of Hindu College, we had summer programs where we went. These were not organized by the college, they were self-organized. We worked with the now not active group, the Shahdol group, founded by a group including a very legendary figure, Dunu Roy. These were IIT graduates, so they used their technical knowledge to work with citizens group, labor unions and others. So we did some studies on thermal power plant, a caustic soda factory, a coal mine. Now, what were students of history, Sanskrit, economics doing? I have no idea, don't ask me. But there were 2 vets also, by the way. So what was interesting is these surveys were about the health hazards posed by these. So the caustic soda factory at that time was still using mercury cathode. There were many people who had what is called the Mad Hatter syndrome. If you pick up a cup of tea, it shakes and you spill the tea. So we went and documented who had it. Just as point of fact, few years later, there was a huge leakage of chlorine from this factory. The DM ordered it closed and the same company replaced this technology. They brought a cell membrane technology. Now, so our study and Shahdol group had nothing to do with that directly, but it indirectly raised level of consciousness, both among the workers in the plant and the community, because they had put up a remarkable exhibition. By then we'd moved on, but our study was used for all the people in that area in Hindi with very nice diagrams explaining the basic chemistry of this plant and why if you entered that plant or even came within, let's say, 6 kilometers of that range, you would smell the chlorine. It was really bad. So I think then I decided I'd study history further. So I was lucky. I got a very good scholarship, a Rhodes Scholarship. I did a second BA in Oxford. And by then, Ram Guha was, I think, he had finished his PhD. He was preparing his book, Unquiet Woods. And he suggested rather than work on industry and technology, since I didn't have a technological training, I should look at forest issues. And since there had been work on Uttarakhand, he said, why don't you work at Madhya Pradesh, central provinces, which I had looked at. And one of the aspects of the paper mill was that it drew on a lot of bamboo and hardwoods from a surrounding area. And the surrounding area of that paper mill was clear cut by the forest department. And they planted eucalyptus and they leased it to the paper mill. This is practice all over India. So what is the prehistory of those conflicts? So I set out to study that. And that was my doctoral work. Of course, I didn't study exactly that. I did something else. You go back in time, you find there's a different set of issues.
I'm just thinking, though, this is a different time of India, because what you're pointing to is a time when environmental or ecological concerns were people saw that they were very tightly linked to social concerns. They continue to be tightly linked to social concerns, but there was also this exchange in those days between the IITs, let's say IISc, many of the technical institutes, and people living in villages, activist groups. And there was an exchange of mutual respect, not with the idea that people from the cities where technology will come and fix issues, but that there was a collaborative effort that was required. People in local places would know what was happening to them, and people in cities could maybe help them with other kinds of things, putting things together as documentation, approaching the court. This continues, of course, all the way to the Sardar Sarovar project. I am thinking of when I was in IISc in 92 to 95, we ran a student organization called Concern, which was really to get IISc students linked with social issues. And the group of students went to the Narmada Valley, again tried to help in whatever way they was possible. There were many of these things. Today, I see, not that there are no such efforts, there are efforts. But largely the idea is now that technology can come in and solve problems agnostic to societal, cultural embedding. Do you see that change, or am I...
That is an old view. When Indian planning takes off in 1950s, despite all the discussion of a socialist frame, they do see technology as the key. This is not about Nehru, it's about the larger leadership. It goes back to the 30s. So this is part of the issue of the developing countries which win freedom in post-Second World War. And to some extent, one should be sympathetic to that view. After all, one of the distinctions of the developed and developing countries is they develop and hang on to a lot of technologies. If you look at this room, major technologies for everything are that.
I'm not saying technology is not useful, just that technology agnostic of the societal environment.
See, one of the differences between IIT, IISc and all these institutions, and let us say University of Delhi or JNU or Jamia, is that we are located inside the city. Our world is the world of city and countryside. And particularly people in colleges and university. The exposure, let us take very simple things. You take a bus and go to the college. You drink water from the canteen. You call in people, so everybody has to stay late after classes. So we ran, the Hindu College Nature Club ran a very interesting set of seminars for 4 years in which almost all the major people who passed through Delhi have spoken there. Sundarlal ji, people who were speaking on nuclear power. We called also people like, the director Project Tiger. It was not only opponents of the system. A very legendary figure, H.S. Pawar. And the Hindu College Nature Club, two of my seniors, Rajiv Bhartari, now retired from Forest Service, Ashish Kotari, it appeared under their name, but about 15-16 people wrote the first report on Narmada Dam, development or destruction. It was published in Economic Political Weekly in 85 or 86.
And which was very iconic.
So I think that the fact, Bhartari, by the way, was a botanist, very unusual in our group. Our group had very few people from the natural sciences. I'm speaking both of the Hindu College Nature Club, strangely, and Kalpavriksh, and IYAESC. These are the three groups I was associated with, the one little earlier. Even in WWF, most of the people that I recall were not from zoology and botany. There were botanists and zoologists, some of great distinction. Mahendra Vyas, who went on to be a very important lawyer. Seema Bhatt, conservation consultant, and now worked with various organizations. But my sense is that these things can drive you in different directions. There were people who went into the sciences. Jagdish Krishnaswamy is one instance. And he went on into hydrology. Actually, because Mr. Sankla told him, interestingly, that the future is in hydrology, it's not in wildlife. It's a fascinating comment. And he said, you're better at mathematics than me. I did botany because I was not good. So I think it depends on the time and place. Ours is a very specific group. You could find at the same time, just to give you an instance, the same sort of background people in Chennai through the Madras Snake Park and Crocodile Trust. Went into herpetology and those interests. And it depends on where you are and who you are, But I think one of the pluses of the university world, which brings me actually really very important point you've made, is that this interchanging that happens, the botany, zoology. So many of the people I hung out with, interestingly, were physicists. One of them is today a well-known climate fiction writer of science fiction, Vandana Singh. She was one of the very important people in our group. She's a little senior to me. I'm naming names because I do think when you look at future trajectory, it's very interesting. She was already interested in this cosmos, Big Bang and all in, class 12, and I was in class 10. So in that period, the other difference is information was very difficult to come by. Absolutely. See, you had to go to that USIS Library of British Council or get hold of a report. And you had to take clippings from the newspaper. One result is that there was a culture of very serious engagement. So once in 2-3 weeks or a month, we'd get together, read something, and everybody would discuss it. So I recall a discussion on, say, Barry Commoner's book, or Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, or the big debate then, who's really deforesting India? Is it the government and industry, or is it people?
Mm-hmm.
And it also made a difference, a huge difference, that there was a whirlwind of action because of one man, Anil Agarwal, and the two people with him in the early years of CSE, particularly Ravi Chopra, and Sunita Narayan joined sometime later. And Anil Agarwal brought together a lot of the people looking at alternative ideas, created a common template, because there's huge differences between all of us. Once you start discussing why a problem happens, it's different from discussing what the problem is, or rather they're connected, what and why. He boiled it down to just two things, very interesting: rich, poor, and men, women. And rich country, poor country. The well-off, the not so well-off. And the state of India's environment, 1982, three of us contributed to it. I don't think our contributions merited any mention at all. It was very kind of the editors that they put us in the beginning and the end. But I think that experience was remarkable, just seeing how that report was put together. And that gave also a sense of the significance of the collective. So I think you're absolutely right. There is a fascination with technology. It's worldwide, but it's probably more in developing countries.
It is more, but the way in which the fascination has changed now, I think there's a less of an awareness of the societal embeddings of any use of technology. It is thought of as this magic silver bullet. We know that's not true, but it's still that way. It's thought. You can develop good technology to solve all social ills. And that was not... That is an idea that has become, not that it wasn't there in our times, but it has become much more sharpened and focused now.
So, okay, let me try and historicize why this was so. I think the late 60s, early 70s was time when the period of remarkable economic growth after Second World War came to an end. Not that the developing countries were partaking of that cake. This is largely in the Western world, Japan, but it did happen. And one result is there were a lot of alternative ideas in the early 70s. So in India, there was a deep attraction, for instance, of the work of E.F. Schumacher, who came here and gave a lot of lectures in the late 70s. Small is beautiful. Ivan Illich, who wrote the book Ecology and Equity, comes to India, travels across India on a bicycle, and incidentally met the Planning Commission at the Prime Minister's behest. Fritjof Capra, who wrote the book Tao of Physics, but there is another book of his, which is less well known, which has a 10-page interview with Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And he, at the end of it, says that this is a remarkable conversation. This is the only world leader he has met who composed herself for the dialogue, had read his writings, and answered them earnestly. She did not agree with him. She actually specifically says exactly what you have said. She said that when she was young, all her toys were wooden toys. She had, for instance, wooden horse. She said now all of these things have begun to be made of plastic. But she said, I would ideally like wooden toys. But the reality is we cannot go back to where we were. We have to take the world as it is. But we see your point of view and we will try to have corrective checks. And she very gently reminded him that India was also a country of Mahatma Gandhi, that she could have referred to the fact that she'd been schooled in Shantiniketan. So I think the sense of corrective was much more there. Perhaps the generation of the political leadership had come out of the freedom movement, and the Indian freedom movement, as you know, also included a lot of articulations of alternative visions of development. Ram Goa has written very recently a book on it, but there's a lot of work on this.
So I'll then take that point as a step off to say, you went to Oxford, you had a remarkable PhD, which, as I said, the 1996 book Fence in the Forest is an environmental classic.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I thought it's an outdated old book which nobody reads.
It is taught in classrooms across the country, I think outside the country also. You chose to come back to India. Why?
I think it's a very exciting country to come to, and a lot of the ideas that we developed and thought of and dreams we had, this is the place to be. I never thought otherwise.
And then you had again a varied trajectory. So you have taught at Delhi University, you have taught at the National Center of Biological Sciences as a visiting faculty, you have taught at Ashoka, you've taught at Kriya, of course you've given guest lectures across the country. I'd like to ask you about a few experiments in some of these places. In Delhi University, you developed a reader in environmental issues and got them translated. So influential papers, 100 different papers, if I'm right.
About 35. We wanted 100, but it became too fat a book. So 35.
And translated them into Hindi and got them bound and cyclostyled and distributed to students at low cost. What was the thinking? First, can you describe the experiment?
So the bound cyclostyled was by the Xerox copies was sort of workshop with the teachers. And workshop was very important because the head of department, my old department, I was not at that time at Delhi University. He just got hold of me and he said, you have to do this.
Which department?
History. So he was an ancient India historian. He's no more, sadly, Bhairavi Prasad Sahu. He wrote a wonderful book called From Hunters to Breeders, which very few people read. It talks about the transition from hunting to breeding of animals, how the hunters became the animal husbandry people. It's a very important book because it uses archaeological evidence. So Bhairavi Sahab said that you come, we will sponsor, the department will sponsor this lunch and tea and all. And I was quite stunned. Some 75 teachers from across the university came. They were from some of the very senior people, Mrs. Prabha Dikshit, to young people. And they had their own criticisms of the 60-odd pieces. And the most important criticism is they're too long. They said, first, second year student cannot read such a long piece. Second, they said they're too complicated. But they liked the pieces. And they also gave a lot of suggestions and ideas. So incorporating them, I then worked with a publisher and did this environmental issues in India reader. There was a small constraint. The university already had a syllabus. So at that time, there was very visionary VC and he and the team around him wanted these concurrent courses. So these were, today it is like in Ashoka University, you have foundation courses. It's not that ambitious. Something very simple. One semester you will study, culture of India, history of Delhi, environmental issues in India. There were two sets of environmental issues. Now here's the unfortunate thing. The sciences studied one thing. They developed it on their own. And the social sciences did environmental issues, which was handed over to the history department. Therefore, it had a historical perspective. And we started very early. We started with, we had a very fine piece by Professor Nayanjot Lahiri on, the decline of Harappa, perennial topic. Then Romila Thapar on forest and perception in ancient India. And several other pieces. Very interesting paper, which was popular, by the way, in the exams. How things, the cheetah and the Mughals, hunting in Mughal India, Divya Mano Singh. And there were other pieces. There was one on Salim Ali by Madhav Gadgil. There were different essays. And the idea of the Hindi reader came because a lot of the students of Delhi University are in Hindi medium. And we got someone who wrote it in Bolchal ki Hindi, not Kitabi Hindi. So it's not highly Sanskritized, nor it is highly Persianized, Urduized. It is easy to understand Hindi. And the person who wrote it, by the way, knows around 8 Indian languages, including Sanskrit, Farsi, Prakrit, Urdu, and Hindi, and knows at least 2 of the bolis. There are different bolis and bhashas. And it has done extremely well. In fact, for a long time, this sold very well. Then, of course, UGC changed its syllabus.
So if you look back at the impact of the reader, not that you can quantify impact, but generally, historians, this is the typical division in Indian academia. The good universities that are known for social sciences are not known for sciences largely. The good universities that are known for sciences are not known for social sciences, and the same is true for the humanities. And here you've gone and done something which I find very interesting and very significant. Across a university so large as Delhi University, so impactful as Delhi University, you have created a reader developed by the history department on the environment and in Hindi. So the reach is both an unusual reach, your catchment is a very different catchment, and it's also in a language which is very local. What do you think? How many people read it? Has it changed the way they think about history or the way they think about the environment?
Past is very difficult to say. It's a long time, 2007. Yeah. Translation took around 2-3 years more. Yes, I have met people who have read this book and they invariably have very warm memories of a particular subject or chapter. I think it helps to think about the environment historically. But it also helps to think about the environment when you're thinking historically, both ways. Why are we where we are? What do we mean by we? What are the forces that have shaped the environment? Which human actions in the past have shaped it in what way? there is also something the reader, of course, couldn't elaborate on, the difference of intended and unintended consequences. So one of the very interesting sections in the reader is there are two very important essays on gender and environment. The forest empowerment, which you know a lot about, Madhu Sareen, how empowerment of village councils has also led to more disempowerment of women. Another classic essay, a fairly long one, very important one by Prof. Sabina Agarwal, on the women and how it is the social relations which are very important. It could be property, it could be custom, it could be particular ways of living. It's not the fact they're women that bars them from access to. So I think it has helped, but I do want to give a lot of credit to the University of Delhi. It's the largest of the central universities. It's very diverse. And I do think that teaching there, which happened little after the reader, but before the translation, made a difference. When you went to the MA classroom, huge number of students were Hindi speakers. They're very eager to learn. And I have taught both a mandatory paper and a non-mandatory paper. So in the first, they were there because they had no option. But in the second, they chose to come there.
I'm also thinking, Mahesh, this is part of if I can say it, a normative principle of yours that history should not be just for educated, and I'm using the words very deliberately in quotes, people with academic degrees, but for the wider masses, because it is, I remember when you were in NMML, you in the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and when you were the director there, talks were open to everyone, and there were auto rickshaw drivers who would come, or, for instance, you would make sure that, as others have done before and after you, that water which was provided within the law, would be provided for, let's say, the policeman who wanted to come in, and maybe the policeman would turn up for a talk and find something of interest. There were people coming in, looking at the history of the place itself, coming in for talks, and I saw a few very unexpected, what I would normally not see in an academic center. You opened it up to a larger group, and is that something that clearly it's something that's important and you believe in, and I understand completely why. But what do you feel has been the outcomes of these intersections of unexpected meetings of people?
No, that is true. We had a lot of talks in the 4 years I was director, almost over 950. But the reason people came from off the street were two. One was we published the entire program at the beginning of the year. That is not normally done in India. I believe that's very important because if you have, let us say, a talk on peacemaking in Nagaland, we had two families which have fought each other, and the scholar was present at the feast they held, very famous families in Naga history. And, Fizo, and one of the figures, his movement, people are allegedly supposed to have killed, whether they did or did not, I won't get into. Their families made peace. That had a lot of people who are from Nagaland, about 70. They didn't come for many other talks. But when they came, they got the program for the year, so they ended up coming for 3 more talks. I also believe it's very important when people come for a talk that they should get a cup of tea and a biscuit. It need not be more than that. We also tried to do the talk so that it ended at 4:30. So people who use public transport can go back. Bulk of the people who come for talks do not have a car. This is very simple. But I just want to emphasize Teen Murti is a tradition of being open. The museum has always been open. And the talks, we put advertisement in 2 papers, Hindi and English. See, I left in 2015. It's almost 10 years. That tradition continues. Even now, there is a small announcement in English and Hindi. It also says, if you wish to join the mailing list, please write to so-and-so. That started then, but it continues. So I do believe museums, public institutions, galleries, libraries, universities have a duty. The most important duty is to make thinking accessible, not just knowledge. So it's not the knowledge economy. That's the easy part, thinking. And all scholars and students of a subject would love to hold forth on what they do. They're looking for an audience. I'll give you a very different instance. We had a talk on history of Delhi, Professor Harini Nagendra, who I've referred to. It was full. I mean, the auditorium was full. We had to put up a screen outside. When Professor Madhav Gadgil spoke, he spoke in a seminar room with 100, but the auditorium with 500 was full. There were people who'd read various books of his. There were people who'd read from that reader, by the way, who came. We had Margaret Macmillan speak on the 100 years of the First World War. Among other things, she's the granddaughter of the great David Lloyd George, very important historian of women in India, by the way. She wrote a book on the coming of the First World War. And we had students from a school who had copies of her book. They'd read the first and last chapter. And they, of course, in today's age, took selfies or whatever the early version of that was. So I think it's very important for academia to help create a larger constancy for itself. Not by getting into partisan debate. That's the easy part. That would be the easy way to say, he's right, she's right, they are wrong, they are right. But by raising the level of thinking about a debate, giving us a sense of the background. And yes, I think it has helped in my case that the kind of interests I have come from the intersection point of the natural sciences, social sciences, with the humanities. I'm eventually a historian. It's part of the humanities. And you can't understand these issues unless you have a sense of the whole. No, you'll never get the whole. You'll spend your life trying to get a tiny part of the whole.
So I want to ask you now about your experiments at Ashoka. But before that, I realized when we talked about your childhood, we forgot one very important thing, which I found very interesting. You told me yesterday that your father, who was a senior journalist, covered the Stockholm conference. So what is the story of that, and how old were you when that happened, and how did that influence how you thought about sustainability?
Look, my father was a person who was in the freedom struggle. He was president of the Tamil Nadu Students' Congress from 40 to 47. He only wore white khadi. And he encouraged my interest in wildlife. He encouraged me, very important, to write. So I had to keep writing whatever I was doing. He helped me to publish an article very early on in 73. He did not help. He only got it typed and I had to send it by post. I also want to tell you a number of articles were rejected, much larger than you'd care to remember. 72 Stockholm conference, he came back full of praise for Mrs. Gandhi because there was a lot of pressure from developed countries saying this is a problem of population and developing saying it's a problem of unequal distribution. I don't think we got into all those details. I was 9 years old. But he brought some remarkable photographs and accounts. And one story stuck in my mind. Number of youngsters attended her press conference. Remember, she was a woman. She was one of only 3 women prime ministers then. Yes. And she was a woman prime minister from Asia. All the prime ministers at that time were from Asia. Sri Lanka the first, India the second, and Israel the third. Just because she was a woman prime minister in her 50s, victor of Bangladesh war, and speaking on environment, and she's the only head of government who was present there other than Olof Palme of Sweden. There was an aura about her. This is well before emergency and all. So a lot of youngsters had come, and they'd come from various demonstrations on whatever the environment. And one of them asked, and my father telling me this, I remember, that if each of us plants one flower, one tree, can we save the planet? And, you were someone who has grown up at feet of Mahatma Gandhi. She didn't know that Mrs. Gandhi is not related to Mahatma Gandhi. What is the message? And Mrs. Gandhi gave some very stirring answer, which I don't recall. So I think this stuck somewhere in my mind. And of course, 73, she launched Project Tiger. That was a very crucial moment for people like me and all of us.
And do you think any of these things in the background, the white tiger, because you spent so much of your scholarly life, including, of course, your PhD, working on the tiger. Is that some reason why the tiger for you has a specific...
The lion as well. I think large, you see, this big debate which I think is there among ecologists, should it be large or small? Small things that run the world, big things that run the world. Both do. I think people have been fascinated by nature since hominins evolved and hominids. But particular animals have been important in particular societies. And I do think that certain animals, trees, plants have been important in Asian cultures. And there is very little doubt in my mind that the lion, the elephant, my distinguished colleague Professor Upinder Singh says that the lion, the bull and elephant were symbols of imperial power in early India. And there is the lion capital of Ashoka, which is well known. There are lesser known capitals.
I mean, everywhere. In Rome, you see lions everywhere. So
lions and the tiger in southern India. Certainly southern eastern India, it's the tiger. So it could be because these animals were large and ferocious, that killing them in combat was a sign of bravery. It could be the fact that they menaced cattle, and the protection of cattle also required bravery. The line between bravery and ferocity is thin. The line between hunt and war is thin. So as a student of history, this is always a fascinating question. When does What is the line between bravery and ferocity? And what is the relationship between hunting and conservation? Now, a lot of the problems of contemporary conservation, because it's rooted in a culture of hunt, which was exclusive. We shouldn't forget culture of hunt was exclusive. As many of my ancient India historians remind us, the king who hunted was regarded as performing the duties of the royal line and the duties of his or her class.
But
the communities who lived on hunting were regarded as below the pale.
What I'm trying to get, I guess, at is it's more than an intellectual fascination for you. It's an emotional fascination.
I think history as a discipline is about writing with some degree of conviction. I will not use the word passion because I don't write that type of history. There are people who write far better than me who write that kind of history. But I think history is written with some conviction. You do have a sense of what you think is fascinating. I hesitate to say what you think is right because you may be dealing with a period in the sense of right and wrong was very different. That's something very critical you have to keep in mind. It's very easy to saying that somebody who did something in 1900 is a baddie, but what was a baddie then? Yeah. And for whom?
So I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget the discussion of your father at Stockholm. But moving to Ashoka University now, I think you've continued your, by now I could say, tradition of seeding different disciplines into each other. The environmental studies department, which you helped set up, has a lot of discussions of the environment with a strong flavor of history, at least the way you teach it. And similarly, the archives at Ashoka, which are very interesting, has a lot of the environment in them. What has been your experience with both of these, as with students of various kinds, undergraduate to PhD students who use it, but also members of the general public?
The archive is still new. It was set up only 9 years ago. For an archive, that's a very small period. We have around 100 collections. We'd like it to be more widely known. Archives of Contemporary India, supported by HDFC. We have papers of some very prominent people, such as Dr. Radhakrishnan, the famous legendary figure, Captain Lakshmi of the Indian National Army. We have now the papers of Dr. Manmohan Singh. Some very important cultural literary figures, such as Prabhakar Machwe and Agyay, very important Hindi writers. All the English letters and writings of the great Girish Karnad, since we are in Karnataka. And we are in the process of acquiring several others. In the world of environment, there is a Suman Sahai of Gene Campaign, Chanti Prasad Bhatt. And since we are interested in lions, tigers, there's Divya Banu Singh, Ranjit Singh, and first founder director of Project Tiger, Kailash Sankla. Several.
Who you started the story with.
Who I started the story with. So it is very interesting, and I think different people in Ashoka use it. There are diplomats who have given us their papers. Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, who played a very important role in climate change negotiations, actually for a pretty long time, from 1992 to 2009. K.S. Bajpai, a very important ambassador. So several others. Both departments have been very congenial places. Environment studies has both very fine ecologists. Interestingly, all three are women. It's very unusual. We have other ecologists in Ashoka, in other departments, such as in biology. There is a strong tradition, Ashoka, in environmental studies of people from social science. So we have people from sociology, politics, and history. The history department, interestingly, has scholars who work on archaeology. And they have helped with natural scientists create a center for archaeology as well. So I think interdisciplinarity has been encouraged in Ashoka from the beginning. At the same time, we have a disciplinary focus. So I am a historian in a history department.
But how do you find, one of the things I have seen personally, now that not now, it's been a while since the Supreme Court ruling that everybody, no matter what undergraduate degree they do in India, must have some exposure to environmental studies in whatever form. And what I have seen is in many universities, colleges, they do it so badly that young people come and tell us, I was interested in the environment, but I had to do these awful courses which were compulsory and I lost all interest. And on the other hand, you have a compulsory course on environmental studies for all undergraduate students at Ashoka. Not just you, but not just your course, but what is your experience with undergraduates who don't want to study this? What could one do as a teacher to make people who are not already interested in the environment get interested in them? Because otherwise we're preaching to the choir. We have this very small number who are already interested and passionate about it, and we continue our conversation.
So I can only speak for myself.
For yourself.
We should not preach.
Right.
No young person wants to be preached to or preached at.
No older person also.
No, particularly young people.
Yeah.
Young people are at a different stage in life. They are questioning the world as it is. And one of the problems of a lot of us, particularly with environment, is that there's a difference between advocacy and pedagogy. And I would like to distinguish myself as a citizen from pedagogy. Now, I know there are people who don't agree with that view. I, for instance, try not to bring campaign literature into the class. If I study it, I explain what it is. So, for instance, just an instance, one of the things which always gets all the students excited, even the ones who sit at the back of the class and try to sort of escape your gaze, is the debate. Paul Ehrlich wrote a book, Population Bomb. It's got a outrageous comment on India that he saw people everywhere and it was population. He apologized and withdrew it in later editions. And we read Mahmood Mamdani, who questions a famous study actually on a Haryana village where he shows that the laborers are different from the large landowners. Large landowners want small family because they want to send the kids to school, while the large family is there in the laborers' classes because they need hands to work. They're really struggling to earn a living. It's not that they don't want
Mother very famously called this producer goods versus consumer goods for children. And I remember when I was first in the class, I was very offended. Yeah. But then I realized he was actually being provocative to make a point, to make you think.
You know what students are stunned by? That Paul Ehrlich wrote this in 1968 when he was a professor. And the co-author was his wife, Anne Ehrlich. And his publisher said, if you put a woman's name, it won't sell. My students are very upset about this. But I try to explain, in 1968, the world was different. I'm not defending Professor Ehrlich. But the second part is that Mamdani wrote this book when he himself was a young man. He was a student, or not even got a doctorate. And he wrote it because he was upset with Ehrlich. It's a polemic. And I asked them, who do you agree with and why? Or I asked them a different question. They read Ivan Illich, Energy and Equity, part of these books. And we asked them a very simple question. Would you limit the number of children all couples have? Would you limit the number of cars every family has? Would you limit both or would you limit neither? Whatever answer you give, please give reasons. And there is no wrong answer. So I think environment is that kind of issue. It's an issue of public choice. Public choice should be informed. We are not sure what the right choice is. Now, I know many environmental friends will cavil at the thought. Yes, the objective should be a world that is habitable, livable, productive, biologically, and safe. We can change the way we put it. And it should be these for everybody, all humans, maybe for all, as far as possible, all creatures. There are some I'm less sure about, smallpox virus and all, I'm not so sure about them. And we must think of future generations, other ecosystems. That adds a new dimension to it, granted. But beyond that, it's a question of public choice. There's no one right choice. There can't be. If there were, we wouldn't be having this debate. And as a student of history, I'm very happy there's a debate. Look at, the 20th century. What was the big debate of 20th century? One of the big debates was how do we put an end to war? That's how the UN came into existence. Other, according to the UN Charter, was to ensure that everybody has certain human rights. As a human, you have these rights. Are we closer to achieving those goals than 1945? I'll leave that for debate. But everybody agrees on that goal. At least notionally, all nations have signed the charter, or they agree, almost all. But what do we do with this issue of the environment in the 21st century? You can't look at either war or human rights without taking the environment into account. That's in a sense the challenge of this century.
So I'll end with one last question then, because I think we've covered a lot of ground from your early experiences shaping you all the way to how you think pedagogy needs to be different about the environment. Now the question about the future. As someone who teaches young people all the time, and you've been teaching for 30 plus years, the world we are entering, people call it all names. I am not very fond of the word polycrisis, but it does capture the confluence of a number of different challenges that the world is facing. Every age would probably think that their issues are unprecedented and the world has not seen. But I think one can really see biodiversity collapse, climate change coming together as two very prominent drivers that will reshape the world in new ways. What are your hopes and what are your fears for this generation of, let's say, very young students now coming into undergraduate and the world they will leave?
Every generation and every period has its hopes and fears. And one of the critical defining features now is that whatever the problem you're looking at, you have to look beyond the confines of a very important institution. Two institutions. One is the nation state. You have to look beyond. This doesn't mean you get away from nation states. There was a time in the 90s, some people wrote that corporations are going to be the future and nation states are finished. Far from that. They can't. They don't just go back to 1648 Treaty of Rhineland and Westphalia. Nation states as entities are here. But how can there be cooperation between them? How can there be cooperation beyond them? That's one. Second, let us say the community of knowledge, science, scientists played an important role in bringing about, say, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 63. That's the kind of cooperation I'm looking at. Or the CITES, which Trade in Endangered Species 74. It came due to citizen action, information, knowledge. So one is, we may have to look beyond confines of nation state. And I think all countries realize that. That's why you have so much conversation on international cooperation. It may not succeed. You may get one set of nations saying, we want this, another saying it's that. That's a positive step. See, talking, negotiating is much better than its alternative, which is armed aggression and conflict. But these are complex issues. I think you put it extremely well. You referred to biological diversity, climate change. They touch on every human being on earth, every activity we do. This is true of a range of issues nations are debating today, discussing with each other. But the second is that we may have to look beyond the market. Again, in the 90s, this period, historical period we're living through, there was a feeling that the market had conquered all and all solutions could be found within it. We're not so sure now. No one is. And we have to think of other instruments of public action. Now, what are they going to be? How are we going to get it? Will it be collective at the local level, micro level, macro level? Again, do we get it in collaboration, cooperation across nation states? So I think these are two large issues, but these are a historian's answer. Every student, every discipline will have different answers. People will reshape the future. I think the role of pedagogy is to, as suggested, to help people to think independently, learn to think for themselves, but also to be able to listen. All of these require listening. Cooperation across nation states between requires listening. Going beyond the market to any form of collective, peaceful action, civic action, requires listening. Listening doesn't mean agreeing, but listening has to go with differing. Differing, listening are two parts of the picture. That's, I know, a very ideal situation, but that's what one hopes to communicate through pedagogy.
This reminds me of something Eleanor Ostrom used to say. In all her books, she thanks her husband, Vincent Ostrom, for his contestation. And what she used to talk about was respectful contestation. And I think listening and disagreeing while listening carefully is another way of saying something very similar to that. But this is a lovely note on which to end. I think we've had a very wide-ranging discussion, and it's been a pleasure to have you, Mahesh. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.